So you're joining me today, and I'm so glad you are because I have Ian Mullane, and we are going to discuss the white paper on the fitness future and rules of engagement.
Welcome to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast for club owners, operators, and fitness professionals. Each week, host Bryan O'Rourke brings you an expert interview with a global influencer at the crossroads of fitness and technology. You gain the insights, tools, and inspiration you need to stay connected to the pulse for what matters most for your business in the age of exponential technologies.
Hello, listeners. I'm your host, Bryan O'Rourke, and thanks for joining me on the podcast today. It's March here in the southern United States, and the weather was actually pleasant this past weekend after the cold we had gotten last month. Furthermore, we're seeing inoculations going up around the world, and deaths and other stats are declining, which is good news. I am cautiously optimistic for the industry as the next few months approach. So keep your heads up and keep fighting. I think things will be improving hopefully sooner than later. One final note, you'll be seeing, if you haven't already, our announcement of the winners of the Fitness Technology Innovation Award and the awards around that. So keep an eye out for those. As I mentioned in the very brief intro, Ian Mullane is joining us today. Of course, he's the chairman and CEO of KeepMe AI. You can see his connection information in the show notes. And recently, he worked on a white paper, The Fitness Future Rules of Engagement, which really buttresses and aligns with the Mooney principle that I've been talking about for the last, 4 or 5 years. Mindset, user experience, new economics, and execution engines. In the white paper he published, which gets into 6 specific things, we will discuss those points. He has some great contributors and thought leaders that share their view on his work, including Humphrey Cobalt, and many others. And so, again, you'll see in the show notes where to get a copy of this. So Ian has a background in fitness and in fintech and other areas. He's out of the UK, so it was my morning, his afternoon. We got to visit. So without further ado, let's bring Ian on the podcast. Well, listeners, as I said in the intro, we have the great pleasure of having Ian on the line with us to talk about the fitness future rules and engagement. Ian, where are you joining us from this afternoon?
I'm joining you from the UK, Bryan. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I really, of course, I've followed you for a while and really appreciate what you've done, and had the great pleasure of writing a little bit about your new white paper, The Fitness Future Rules of Engagement, along with some very, very highly respected colleagues that were part of it. So it was a great pleasure. I would encourage, I'd encourage everyone, we'll have the link in the show notes, to read this document. And it's really, to me, in a strategic way to think about the fitness industry space. Humphrey in his intro, talks about it quite well. And you mentioned in the paper about accepting a new type of reality. Ian, can you kind of illuminate what that means for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I think what we obviously all need to accept, and I think increasingly the industry has now accepted, is the fact that we're not going back to where it was pre-pandemic, right? Anybody who remains convinced that there is any possibility of that is likely to be firing chapter 11 very, very quickly over the next 12 months or so. So it's changed, and it's changed in a number of areas. I think we'd all agree that the digital aspect of our industry is increasing in importance. But as I've also heard you say, Bryan, in the past, these are not new things that have entered the marketplace. They have been around for a fair period of time. We're just seeing the acceleration because of the pandemic. And In a way, what this paper is a call to arms for all operators to effectively accept that reality and try to understand what it's going to be like for them going forward and how they can take advantage of that.
Exactly. Because for a lot of people in the space, they are confused. I think sometimes there's a sense of being almost overwhelmed. And what's great about the paper, I think, is you get into 6 very specific things. But before we get into those, this term hybrid, Leon Rudge has asked a lot about it. I coined the term a number of years ago. You say the future is not hybrid, it's ecosystem. Explain what that is for the audience.
Well, I think the differentiation there is that hybrid effectively suggests maybe that there's 2 elements to it and that they are separate or distinct. What I'm trying to bring together there with the utilization of ecosystems, or if I can steal one of your terms, platform, is that we are bringing together a amount of technology plus existing operations into one effective entity focused on customer outcomes. And that's the primary difference which I'm trying to play here.
Yep, it's a very, very important distinction. And you get into that in the concept of, players in the ecosystem needing to understand where are they going to fit in, because none of us are going to be able to, or maybe 1 or 2 might, but they're on the big tech side, be able to control the entire ecosystem, right?
No, that's correct. It's impossible, nor should we try to, because it is such a very large. I think one of the areas which I do like to point out is that I'm not suggesting that the increase in digital aspect or the arrival of the digital players is detrimental for our market or likely to decrease it. I think that they're going to increase the opportunity because they're going to bring the concept of fitness to cohorts of the industry that we couldn't possibly reach. So with that being the case, then what I'm suggesting in this particular case is that the fitness element for digital and the idea that we are going to work within digital frameworks is something that we should be embracing as an industry.
Yes, I agree. And before we get into the 6, it's a lot of people don't like the analogy, but I've used the analogy of the digital music industry. When Napster came out and Sony and was involved in all litigation, and a lot of people bemoaned the death of the music industry. And what was really happening is digital was redefining what the industry space is. And really growing it significantly. And now what you've seen in the first decade of the 21st century, the number of live concerts attended globally went up 300%. Because if you don't, in today's world, you can have access to any kind of music you wanted that was completely impossible 35 years ago. So there was no way for you to even be exposed to many forms of music that, you couldn't have enough albums in your house to have all that music. So to your point, that grew the pie. And I think that's what you're referring to now. It's probably a poor analogy, but it's similar in the sense of what the scope of wellness is, and that, the gym or fitness facility marketplaces can't touch all of what that is, right?
No, we can't. And it's not just that. I think we both agree that it is fundamentally challenging to be the leading digital practitioner here without the extensive experience, resources, capital, and human resources that big tech will bring to this aspect of it. I thought your music analogy is interesting. I was reading over the weekend we all remember Steve Jobs standing up and saying 1,000 songs in your pocket. But I also saw somebody suggest that we're not far away now through Apple Fitness Plus of having 1,000 workouts in your pocket. That's the evolution. Now, we all well know what the iPhone and the iPod before it did for music delivery of services, right? So are we starting to witness the same impact, possible impact in fitness through the same concepts, of which are much more broadly accepted now and possible to be delivered by even operators to some degree?
Agreed. And so let's jump into the 6 kind of guidelines, a way of thinking. The first one you bring in is kind of analogous to what we're just discussing about, is recognizing Jim's not the sole guardian of consumer wellness, right?
No, not anymore. I mean, and we still have a very important part of the consumer psyche, which is what we should leverage and grow from. But we are increasingly moving away from fitness to wellness and health as being the descriptive words. And with that being the case, that means our consumers are, shall we say, a lot more educated than previously. Most of them now realize that 3 visits to their gym each week are not going to constitute a holistic view of wellness or fitness. So what is necessary is to understand that the consumer is also looking at nutrition, hydration, recovery, mindfulness, mental health, and a whole host of other aspects of it. And then that additional, which is the important, I think, is that they are more aware now of their own physical progress because of the capacity of wearables and Apple Health and Google Fit and those type of areas.
Absolutely. Which really is the next item, which segues perfectly, which is people have to think, hey, how are we going to compete in this ecosystem? What role are we going to play in our business models that fit, right?
Yeah, that's correct, right? So it's what is important is understanding what is it that we can deliver, and then how can we enhance and refine that so that not only does it take advantage of the changes in trends, but also cements our place within the consumer's overall wellness journey. Because I am suggesting, and maybe controversially or not, I'm not sure, that basing your entire business premise around a large physical facility just based on equipment and location is not really a moat in modern day that is going to allow you to build a sustainable business. And I guess the numbers from the last 20, 30 years where industry retention is at best 50% and a lot worse in some cases would suggest that has not worked as a premise for long-term sustainability.
That's right. And it's just consumer expectation, as you've cited. I mean, it's the way they conduct business. I think in your rule 3, where you talk about striking a balance between that physical and digital divide in the context of how you compete, you use a great analogy of banking, and thinking of these other industry spaces that have dealt with the similar challenge of how are you going to compete balancing out both dynamics.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you've used examples yourself in the past around Netflix and Blockbuster, right? I mean, there are many examples of now. What tends to happen is that when digital starts to enter into a marketplace at the scale that it's entering into our marketplace at the moment, that we end up dividing into 2 camps. Now, I'm not saying it's 50-50, but we will certainly get some of those that will literally just decide that this is not going to impact. I've still, and you will have seen as well, that even in the last week, Peloton's share price has driven a massive amount of conversation around the fact, oh, it's all over. Always knew this was going to happen. It was only ever an exercise bike. They completely ignore the 1.3 million subscribers at over a 90% retention rate. They completely ignore that the average workouts done by a Peloton customer are 1.5% the average visits to a bricks and mortar gym. So we know that Peloton is not the answer to the woes of the industry, nor is it going to dominate the industry, but it is a new component within the industry that's utilizing some of the things you've talked about for a long time around data, for personalization, for making sure that we've got engagement from our audiences. And we need to bring that in-house to traditional bricks and mortar operators. We are critical components of the overall wealth and health of the nations. And for that to happen, we need to move with the times so that we can keep that position. Otherwise, we are going to see it eroded over time.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And you move from there into the notion of really wising up to the competitive landscape and other experiences that are on the horizon. I've written about AR, VR being the next new platform. You mentioned 5G connectivity and what that's going to mean, all these other things, just the continued proliferation of these technologies and what the implications are. Talk about wising up as an operator and recognizing that.
Well, I do think that operators, I very rarely come across an operator, apart from at the very large end, where there is somebody who has responsibility for digital strategy within the organization. The idea of digital transformation or even a change program just really doesn't exist in many cases. if we as an industry expect that the digital aspect is going to continue to play an important part, then someone within an organization or the leader of the organization has to take an active part in understanding what impact digital will have and what that strategy may be as a whole. Do we seriously believe that we're going to see a decrease in the quantity of wearables? Do we think that we're going to see a decrease in the amount of at-home digital platforms available? Or that Apple's going to decide, you know what, we've decided not to go any further with this because it was fun, but it wasn't big enough? All of these aspects are not looking at a trend. They are looking at already being cemented into the way that our sector operates. So my concern and my rallying cry here is for organizations to start looking at who has responsibility for making sure that they stay current. It's great when you've got commentators like your good self or myself or Leon, whoever, making comments, but we're not doing execution. We're only providing the ideas, and we need individuals to take those things and run with them, because what we don't want to be doing is talking about how bricks and mortar becomes the new Blockbuster in 2 to 5 years' time, because Apple and Peloton being the Netflix at that time, because we do have plenty of knowledge and plenty of notice to take action.
Yeah, and you may not know this. So I am an operator, and I have 14 operating companies. So, especially when you're talking about this and segueing into the fifth point, this is where the rubber really hits the road, right? Especially for businesses that have been functioning in a certain way of doing things. Not only is the mindset shift really hard, you have to get your hands dirty and actually change and rethink, how does that customer journey, your point five, how is that really going to look now? Where does it look present? Where does it need to look, and why? You get into some great examples of that, like in personal training, for example, and what that is. That's, in my experience, having done that for many years, that's where people, that's the secret sauce. If you're going to get it done, you're going to get it done there, but it is hard to do.
Yes, it is. And that's why I've tried. I mean, one of the questions I've had more than any, and I tried to address in a post recently, was that how do we do that now, right? How do we start to take advantage? And, the technology aspect of it's one side, but the analog version was just acknowledge that this is actually changing, and have your teams take a look at that. When Ian arrives and he's got a Whoop on his wrist, then you just say to him, right, how long have you been using the Whoop? What do you get out? How do you use it? Now, if I come back to you and say, yeah, you know what, it looks good, but I don't bloody use the thing, that's one thing. But if I say, this is the thing that drives my intent each day, then saying as a PT, can I take a look at your data, right? Let's analog bring this in so that we can start doing it. That is personalization. And you and I are living in such a curated environment now, from the music, the food, every aspect of our lives is much more curated because of technology. People are going to expect that when they go into the clubs as well.
That's right. Absolutely. It is so hard to do, though, especially, and you get into some things around that, because my context is, I talk about Mooney, which is mindset, user experience, new economics, and then execution engines, which are so challenging. And you know this, you use Apple in your example, where when you're looking at that customer journey, you want to use automation, you want to use tech, but you also want to have the human touch at the right touch points in the right way at the right time. And you see Apple in their retail experience. You can experience that brand in lots of digital ways, but at the point of purchase or the point of contact, you have a highly trained individual that can take care of you right then. And if you know what you want, they can check it out. You don't have to go to a counter. You don't have to do anything. And it's easy to talk about Apple because they're a huge company, but at the same time, doing that is so hard. But you bring up the notion of automation being a key component, and automation has been one of the key tenets of execution engines, as I call them, going forward, and use of data and use of the platforms, use of all this to create that. Can you give our listeners some examples and opine on that whole thing more?
Yeah, I think I've been relatively surprised to find the lack of adoption of automation. There seems to be this type of perception that we're handing over what is an incredible part of or important part of the experience. reality when we've dug into member journeys is that many of the things that are supposed to happen or they think happen just don't happen on a regular basis.
Right.
And I have sat in meetings where I have had a C-level explain to me how they do it, and then others look at him and shake their head, and he's going, we don't? Well, we do, but what happens is that we get a list, and then he has to take that list, and then they upload that into there, and then it falls down. And I think that the automation, I think we would agree, retention is never going to have a silver bullet. Retention is about doing the right thing consistently.
Yes.
And for that to be achieved, there's very small aspects. It's incremental also, whether it's making sure they get the welcome letter or making sure you wish them happy birthday, those aspects. Automation can allow us to ensure those things happen so that we're given more time to utilize our very valuable human resources for what is the more important human engagement, rather than trying to download MailChimp lists and upload them into other systems and cross-reference them against permission lists. None of that stuff should be there. So automation, I think, coming into the next 6 months, where operators are going to have to try and do more with less, is an ideal opportunity for them to take a look at what areas of the business can be automated. And what's fortunate for them is that the industry is quickly becoming more capable and having more tools available to allow it to automate some of these key repetitive tasks, which have no human value to the operator, but plenty of business value to the member.
That's absolutely true. And it is so true that there are very few brands today that are doing, I mean, there are some that are doing it, obviously, but there are a lot of players out there that don't have the capability currently, or even the thinking of how. And your story about the nostalgia of a lot of people that had been around the industry space for a long time, you know, believing a thing through their lens instead of the customer lens of what's happening, or even sacred cows. You know, in the United States, for example, there's a lot of people that believe when it comes to their membership base, let sleeping dogs lie. Do not communicate with them because then they're going to cancel. So, which is just insane today to operate a business in that way. So, you know, it's really an opportunity, as you point out in your paper. And I think that's why it's so great when you enter the fray of this document, being one of mindset, then getting into the specifics of what you mean. So I found it to be a fantastic piece. What has been your reception to this in the market right now, Ian?
There's been a lot of interest. I think that there is, you know, a lot of people are looking for ideas and want to engage around how digital will affect their business for obvious reasons, because, you know, the media has dominated us with stories around the new participants within there. I feel that there is still a large appetite for bringing this in at a more basic level in many ways. I think some people are looking at this as not the paper, but this time period as a way to bring in foundation aspects of it in there. So I hope that what we're going to see, I mean, over 1,000 downloads, 28 countries to date, there's clearly a lot of interest. I hope that what will come from it is going to be some action plans. And I think that we will also hopefully get a lot more feedback. The next stage from this, Bryan, for me, you've written enough yourself, so you know these papers they can be challenging from a time commitment perspective to put in place. But what I've been asked to do, and what I intend to do, is to now focus on maybe a sub area within there, which is data and AI specifically. So helping operating executives understand what data is, the role of data, and how they can look at it from a fitness operator's perspective specifically, and then to take a look at how now and in the future AI could be utilized to work with there. Because what would be really challenging is if we go through another 3 to 4 years where the primary asset of the business, or one of the primary assets being the data, is not utilized, because that is the nuclear warfare that's being armed by the digital competitors, and they are going to find themselves uniquely positioned to get the engagement we dream of if we don't weaponize our own data ourselves.
That's absolutely true. That is absolutely true. So KeepMe AI, your business, obviously you have a platform that helps organizations do what we're describing.
In many cases, yes. What I have to be careful of is that people don't take the white paper and say, so that's KeepMe.ai. It absolutely is not. There's an aspiration for it in many respects, but not at all. And believe me, Bryan, it has happened. I had William in the US telephone me the other day and said, we just had the first off the rank. What's off the rank? That they were a little disappointed to find out we weren't going to deliver the white paper to them. But in reality, yes, the AI-driven engagement, insights, automations, a large part of that is KeepMe. And we enjoy and have enjoyed a large increase in interest in that over the last 18 months. We've got customers in 10 countries now. I expect that will continue because of our focus specifically on this as a sector. And quite frankly, I'd rather be lucky than good. Now is the time to have a product set for this particular area on the basis that we don't want operators going off and trying to work with an ERP vendor like an Oracle or something along those lines to build it themselves. That's not going to work.
It's not going to work. Well, Ian, thank you so much for making time today to go through the Fitness Future Rules of Engagement. Listeners, there will be a link to get the document in the show notes, so please check it out. Ian, always a pleasure to visit with you. Thank you for all your great work and spending some time with me today to go through this white paper and to have a very fascinating discussion about mindset and what people need to be thinking about today and the future.
Well, thank you, Bryan, and thank you for being one of the individuals that has helped me to understand this industry from a technology perspective and to be able to incorporate many of those ideas into my own as I've developed them forwards.
Well, thank you, Ian. Hello, listeners. This is Bryan O'Rourke, and thanks so much for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. The podcast is made possible by the Fitness Industry Technology Council, a consortium of global brands working together to enhance the adoption of technologies in the fitness space. Our company, Videri Ventures, which is invested in Vertimax, Montezuma, Gold's Gym, Houston, Texas, and Fitness 24/7 Thailand, also underwrites the podcast, along with our service companies, Integris Advisors, Moon Mission Media, and others. Please feel free to share this podcast with your colleagues. And if I can be of any assistance to you, don't hesitate to reach out, bryanko'rourke@gmail.com, or find me on any of the major social networks. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.